Russia may be planning to join China in attacking Taiwan. The US and its allies are building an alternative to the Belt and Road, and is America widening its military edge over China? That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Incogni. Now, you probably know that companies are collecting your personal data, but you may not realize just how many. Dozens, maybe hundreds, most of which you've never heard of, and you have no idea what they're doing with it. Incogni helps stop them. I'll explain more at the end. And one of the biggest companies that's collecting tons of your personal data and not telling you what they're doing with it is TikTok. We all know by now that TikTok filed a court challenge against the recent US law that would force China to divest, or TikTok gets banned. Well, it turns out that the petition argues that TikTok can't divest from China because the Chinese Communist Party doesn't want them to. I'm certain that's going to help their court case. Looks like the US military might have a new leg up on China in the Pacific. That's because a new drone delivery service might help out with resupplying US forces should a war break out between the two. So does this mean that instead of MREs, the troops will be getting Uber delivery? I'm not sure how well soldiers will fight with a belly full of Arby's. The Pentagon has expressed interest in a system operated by Elroy Air, which uses an aircraft known as the Chaparral to deliver essential military supplies on a global scale. Dave Merrill, CEO and co-founder of Elroy Air, said that it solves the problem of operational supply tempo and it solves the problem of risk to life for troops in the battlefield. Well, all risks to life except getting Arby's delivery. And given that Chinese aircraft continue to violate Taiwanese airspace, this is increasingly important. The CCP continues to carry out numerous joint combat readiness drills in or near Taiwanese waters and airspace, with its Air Force and Navy cooperating in the joint drills. Taiwan's top security officials said that Beijing will continue to ramp up and intensify these drills around the inauguration of Lai Ching-te as Taiwan's new president, which will take place on May 20th. China has big show up to your ex's wedding and blast heavy music metal outside of the church energy with this one. It's over, Xi. Move on already. And in even worse news for Taipei, it looks like Russia is planning to help China out with any attack on the island. What? Russia? Invading a sovereign nation? No. What's next? You're going to tell me that Putin has chapped nipples from constantly taking shirtless thirst traps in freezing Russian weather? In a recent congressional hearing, U.S. intelligence officials said that China and Russia are increasing their military cooperation, including plans concerning Taiwan. The director of the Defense Intelligence Agency even said, bottom line is that basically, if we were to have a conflict with one, the chances are we would have a second front. China is already helping Russia with its war on Ukraine. So this looks like a case of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Yes, because Russia is such a valuable military ally these days. If you want allies that make suicide bomber tanks that only suicide bomb themselves, super effective. And speaking of the no-limits partnership between Russia and China, Xi Jinping continues to claim that his country is neutral in the Russia-Ukrainian war, but that peace talks must include Russia's positions. So it's not so much a no-limits friendship as much as a, I got your back, but subtly, because being your friend right now isn't looking that great, dog. Xi Jinping is on a trip to Europe, and many of the old continent's leaders are trying to convince him to take a harder line on Russia. But while they do that, Xi maintains that China is neutral and that the West instead must pressure Ukraine to make concessions. I wonder what kind of concessions he wants Taiwan to make. And if you thought Taiwan was the only one in the Pacific being pestered by China, you thought wrong. Australia is complaining about an unsafe Chinese sonar attack against one of its ships, the HMAS Toowoomba. I, too, am puzzled that the CCP chose to attack this ship. With a name like that, how could anyone feel threatened? The incident happened in contested international waters near Australia. What a shocker! China's contesting another part of the free ocean. Is there any body of water they aren't claiming? I wouldn't be surprised if they next tried to invade San Diego and yelled, SeaWorld is ours! Ironically, Australia's Vice Admiral Mark Hammond raised the incident with Chief Admiral Hu Zhongming at a symposium in China named Seas of Shared Future. Speaking of China and a lack of safety, the Chinese Communist Party continues its stunning track record of fine infrastructure projects with a highway collapse that killed 48 people. It's suspected the past month of heavy rainstorms was the culprit. though the casualties could have been much worse. A Chinese driver is being praised for helping reduce casualties. He used his car to block other cars from falling down the hole, while his wife got out and told the other drivers what was happening. The China Worker Development Foundation and Alibaba Group Holdings awarded about $1,400 to the man, who then donated the proceeds to the victims' families. Because even though the CCP is a horrible, evil regime, it doesn't mean all Chinese people are. And after the break, CNN warns the U.S. against confronting the CCP. Welcome back. CNN reporter and author Fareed Zakaria slammed Republicans for confronting China, calling the strategy reckless and dangerous. Zakaria warned against seeking to contain China because the U.S. would likely find itself alone if it did. Then I wonder how the Quad and AUKUS got started, and what all those U.S.-led joint naval drills are about, or how the world worked together to stop Huawei from building 5G everywhere. Also, the fact that the Biden administration has continued most of the Trump-era China policies, almost as if it's not just a Republican strategy. And in the Maldives, which is here for you Americans who don't know geography, President Mohamed Mu's party had a stunning victory in recent parliamentary elections, which was also seen as a resounding support of his plan to distance the Maldives from India and shift towards China. The outgoing opposition parties in parliament had opposed Chinese-funded infrastructure project that Mu's plans to go forward with. No doubt Beijing is going to want to use the Maldives as a springboard to launch further Belt and Road projects and contain its rival India. Hope they have better luck than Sri Lanka. And after the break, China has plans. Space plans. Welcome back. China is increasing its space capabilities and sending a rocket to the far side of the moon. Isn't it interesting how China always sends rockets to the far side of the moon, where no one can see them, so they can then claim they found something amazing? The uncrewed rocket Chang'e 6 blasted off from Wengchan Space Launch Center for a 53-day mission, hoping to bring back samples from the dark side of the moon. But Pakistan's first satellite moon mission was also on board. It's beautiful. They're working together with one shared vision of exporting Xi Jinping thought to the Martians. Isn't that nice? Gee, I wonder why the aliens never want to visit us. And Xi Jinping is using China's space program to make even further inroads into the global south. Xi Jinping has high hopes for the advancement of joint space collaboration and research, particularly in the Caribbean and Latin America. Because it isn't like the CCP wants to use such research near the U.S. to spy or anything. Hope the economic cooperation works out better than in Sri Lanka. And to any Martians watching this, if the CCP offers to build anything for you, just say, which is Martian for, that's going to be a no for me, dog. But it's not all rosy for China in the global south, and the U.S. has certain ways of containing China without resorting to regime change. Debt owed to China is worrying some Central Asian countries, such as Kyrgyzstan. The country's total debt to China since 1991 is a whopping $6.2 billion. That's 45% of its GDP. At least they got some of that quality Chinese infrastructure. And these once deferred payments are about to come due. Beijing has already rejected Kyrgyzstan's request for an additional deferment. Anti-Chinese sentiment is running high in Kyrgyzstan, with protests against Chinese investment in the country in 2019 and 2020. Hope it works out better for them than in Sri Lanka. And that is part of the reason why the United States is working with the Philippines to develop an alternative infrastructure project to China's Belt and Road. You might remember that the Philippines withdrew from China's BRI a few months ago. Tensions between China and the Philippines are running hot right now, so China's trying to cool them down by spraying water cannons at Filipino fishermen. The infrastructure project, known as PGI Luzon Corridor, is the first of its kind, a series of investment projects meant to deepen ties between the U.S. and its regional allies and improve Southeast Asian infrastructure. President Biden announced the move while hosting Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. at the White House. Yes, Japan is involved too. China's going to love it. The U.S. and Japan will provide funding for technology in the Philippines that will improve wireless communication throughout the region. With the BRI falling apart, sometimes literally, this seems the best way for Washington to peacefully contain China's rise, or rather mitigate its fall. And despite what CNN will tell you, that's something both sides of the political aisle can agree on. Now I got a video I want to show you that you're going to love. But first, this episode is sponsored by Incogni. Whenever you do anything online or use apps on your phone, there are tons of companies that collect your personal data. When I signed up for Incogni, More than 2 years ago, I discovered there were dozens of data brokers that potentially had my private information without my permission. So how do you protect yourself? Get as many of these companies as possible to delete your data from their systems. That's what Incogni does for you. Incogni has already gotten my details removed from 219 of these data brokers who've collected my info, and I didn't have to do anything after signing up. Incogni just handles it. So I recommend you get Incogni for yourself and reclaim your own data. Go to incogni.com/uncensored and use the code uncensored to get 60% off an additional Incogni plan. Get your personal data off the market with Incogni. And click on this new video from my show Deep Thoughts While Gaming, where I talk about news, politics, and philosophy through the lens of gaming. I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.